Welcome everyone, and I'm just so excited to kick off our very first episode of the Faculty Leadership Spotlight series. And so this is just a series where we're able to highlight purpose-driven leadership across our community at WashU and how the faculty, regardless of if you're in administration or if you're a professor, what leadership role you hold and how you're able to exemplify that, that's what's important and that's what we want to show to students. So my name is Rishika Jayaprakash and I'm a freshman here at WashU. I'm studying philosophy, neuroscience, and psychology and planetary sciences on the pre-med track in the hopes of becoming a astronaut and a doctor one day. So we'll see how that goes.
Very cool.
Thank you.
Very cool.
And for our first episode today, we have Professor
Megan Daschbach. I'm a teaching professor in the Department of Chemistry. I've been here as a faculty member. This is my 14th year with the chemistry department, and I have taught general chemistry all 14 years, and I'm delighted to be here. Thank you so much for asking me.
Thank you so much. And I actually took Professor Daschbach's chemistry course last year. Best class I've ever taken. Was I good at it? Probably not, but did I learn a lot from it? 100%. And I'm really excited to have Dr. Daschbach here tell us about all the different leadership. So could you just tell us a little bit about your role here and how you're just a leader at WashU?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. Thanks so much for having me. So, like I said, I've been here for 14 years now. So I'm a teaching professor here. So there are tenured and tenure track faculty members here. And for those faculty, research and publication is a part of their responsibilities here along with teaching. I'm on the teaching faculty side of things, so I don't have that component, even though I participated in educational research. It's not a part of my required responsibilities here. So I just focus my whole time on teaching, which is fantastic. So there are 3 different possible titles that teaching faculty can hold here. When I first joined, there was only 2. So I joined as a lecturer and then was promoted to a senior lecturer position. And then very excitedly, a few years ago now, the teaching faculty here created an association to advocate for ourselves. And so for essentially throughout the history of WashU, we were not allowed to hold the title of professor. We advocated for ourselves. We were successful in that. And so now there's the 3rd title, teaching professor, which I was one of the 3rd class, so to speak, to be nominated and to hold that title. So a big part of my job here is to teach general chemistry. It's a first-year introductory STEM class. Big part of my job is to teach the content, but probably the part of my job that I enjoy the most, that's less obvious, is to support students as they transition from high school to university. And in their first year here, transitions are tough. Even for the most outgoing of us, transitions are difficult. Exciting, but difficult as well. And so I think for a lot of students, that's a time in their STEM career where their STEM career is at a very fragile place for a lot of folks. Experiencing imposter syndrome. Am I going to make it here? Am I as smart as I've been told my whole life? Have I made the biggest mistake? Should I have gone closer to home? All of those things kind of go through your head. So kind of shepherding students through that experience is a really big part of my life here, which I really enjoy. And then I also participate in a lot of service roles. So in terms of faculty governance, there's a lot better representation of teaching faculty on various committees throughout the university, but there's also committees that only teaching professors are eligible for, and there are not many of us. We're growing, but there are not many of us yet, so I take those roles really seriously too and try to advocate for fellow teaching faculty across all disciplines here.
Wow, that's amazing. And I actually didn't even know anything about the history behind just the title of teaching professor.
Yeah.
So I think that's crazy because that's something that not a lot of students hear about. And even within the STEM field, I think that's something that we constantly talk about because the 2 aspects that you mentioned, one, obviously there's the teaching the actual science part of it, but the transition and all of the questions you mentioned went through my head and still do go through my head because as someone who is pre-med at a very med heavy school, it's so difficult to just sit there, and when you're going through those introductory courses, especially when you hear them called as weed outs and things like that, you're really just considering what is my role at this school and what can I do to make even like the chemistry department better as I'm learning from it, which
Yeah.
I think is where like leadership plays into like the STEM field.
Yeah.
When you think of leadership, I feel like a lot of people and like students, like faculty, everyone always thinks of, oh, like in the business school, like
Yes,
they teach leadership,
for
they're
sure.
leaders, or like, oh, we think of like the chancellor or like the vice chancellor. But in the STEM field, why do you think leadership is important? How are you able to really exemplify that?
That is a really great question. All really great points. And admittedly, I probably this is the area where I probably have the most imposter syndrome myself. Of like, that term feels weird
Mm-hmm.
in some ways. Yeah, but we've used lots of different terms. Role model, someone. It's so important to be able to look up in the front of the classroom, and for in an ideal world, everyone meets someone to go, I see myself in that person.
Mm-hmm.
And so in that way, I think leadership comes into play in a very big way for instructors of all classes, but particularly these large introductory classes. I've started, with humor when I meet someone who's not in the academic bubble, and they
Uh-huh.
ask me what I do. I say, oh, I'm a professor of chemistry. And then usually they tell me about how they hated chemistry in high school, and I say, "Oh, it's just because you didn't have the right teacher." But
Uh-huh.
after that conversation, I go, "Well, really, I view myself more as a captain of a cruise ship, and in
Mm-hmm.
that way, I think that it very much is a leadership role." And you know, I could boil that role down of I just have to get students from port A to
Mm-hmm.
port B. Like we just have to learn this material and get through it.
Mm-hmm.
But if that's all I'm doing, no one's going to enjoy that. That's
Mm-hmm.
not going to be a fulfilling experience. And so my job really is to make sure that everybody feels supported, that I'm training my undergraduate and graduate mentors in the right
Mm-hmm.
way. I'm meeting them where they're at and empowering them to do the roles, the facilitation roles that we're sending them in for. I have administration staff that I need to
Mm-hmm.
look after. I have my colleagues that I work with, and all of this has to work together to deliver a product to you, the student, who has worked incredibly hard your whole life to
Mm-hmm.
be here and is so deserving of this opportunity. And to do all of that in a way that students meet with what I like to call compassionate challenge.
Mm-hmm.
You for so many of you, you have been so successful up to this point, but you haven't your application skills and your problem solving
Mm-hmm.
skills really have not been tested much beyond kind of rote memorization of
Mm-hmm.
material, and now's the time to kind of grow that skill set. But you're doing a new thing, and that's a really scary thing. So to convince you that this is a worthwhile thing, that you can do this,
Mm-hmm.
and to build the right amount of challenge, and to have you feel supported along the way, all of that takes a lot of coordination skills, a lot of knowing when to kind of put your foot on the gas pedal and
Mm-hmm.
when to ease back up. And um it's very, I've described this as, kind of when I went through watching my kids learn to walk, like
Mm-hmm.
bumping into things is a part of learning to walk. You have
Right.
to be invested in the process and know that they are going to walk at the end of this.
Mm-hmm.
There's a part of me as the instructor that just wants to run behind you and go, you don't have to do these hard things
Uh-huh.
because this is the first time you're doing it and it's really tough. But know that this is essential to your growth as students and as independent and intellectual thinkers. So all of that's wrapped up into how I view leadership in this role.
Oh, that's just a fantastic answer because what even like as I was taking the course and as we were doing, like we knew that there was like a big team behind it. Like,
Yeah.
from like the professor that's teaching all the way to like the people that are recording our lectures. Like there's just so many people in between that one, like we don't get a chance to highlight and appreciate, and two, like we just don't know a lot about. So I
Yeah.
think there's a lot of jobs there that come together to make up the entire education and teaching department in general. And I think that's what's really important in the STEM field, especially with the amount of emphasis we put on like education and putting whatever we learn in theory into practice.
Yeah.
I think that's really important. And just as like a professor who's like, when you teach like in a lecture hall full of like 200 students, or when you sit in like recitation sections where there's only like 20 to 30 students, how are you really able to see like a leadership difference amongst students? And I know we have like the reflections that we
Mm,
write, like the literacy reflection. So
yeah.
how can you see that translated between us?
That's a really, really great question, and one of the things that I think is most fun about teaching chemistry the way that we do here is you are all exploring that, and so I don't necessarily, there's a reason that college is 4 years. Life's a journey, and we get to a small chapter in that. But it's really cool to watch that transformation of the year, where you start to think about who am I in these collaborative academic spaces, and in these spectrum of personalities and these spectrum of skills, what do I bring, and what do I need to work on in the same way? I was just telling another student the story today of when you all come in on day one. There's 200 of you in that lecture hall. I look out and you all look like 200 high schoolers, largely because you got there at like 8:30 for your 10 o'clock class and are like super prepared and, have your notebooks ready, in just a few weeks, you're like rushing in at 10:05, but
that was me.
But what's really cool is just in just a short amount of time, in 3 or 4 weeks, when I start to listen to the conversations that you're having when I ask an iClicker question, or I can hear you kind of puzzling the material out in lecture. You don't want to share your work. You're very like, I don't want to be wrong or venture an idea. And it's while I can't pay attention to any necessarily individual in a sea of 200, it's kind of a collective, palpable vibe, if you will. And then just a couple weeks in, I'll pose a question and I start to hear things like, oh, that's a really good way of looking at that. I didn't think of it that way. Or, well, temperature changed and we didn't even factor that in. Is that important, or is that not? And I'm like, we're talking to each other like scientists, and to see that, to be able to kind of plant those seeds. I think you're just figuring out who you are in many ways, as being independent and away from, family and friends and the support system you've had, and forming your worldview through this, and figuring out your own leadership style and all of that. It's really cool to have had a hand in building all of this infrastructure that allows you to start exploring that. And that's a really cool thing to witness.
Yeah, and I like can totally relate that to how I was just feeling like on the first day, where I was like, oh, like I have to get this question right. And then by the last time I was like, there's like 4 different things that could be right. And I'm just trying to like eliminate the answers. But this, like, my next question just kind of like builds off of this. But like when kids are always learning things in school or college, they're like, oh, I'm never going to use like the Pythagorean theorem or like Kirchhoff's law in like my day-to-day life. But I feel like there are little like other skills that are like woven into like the way that we study or the way that chemistry is taught. And so how can you see like the skills that you learn now, like 20 years from now when I'm applying for a job or when I'm like at a job, how could you see that translated?
It's a really great question, and it's one that we've really thought about in a new way. Not to plug an arts and sciences program, but to plug an arts and sciences program. So you might be familiar. The Arts and Sciences College is launching the Literacies for Life and Career Initiative, where they are giving specific names to these literacies or fluencies or skills that students will develop through the course, that of course is tied to the content, but in some ways independent of the content. And it's something that we have always thought that we were doing intentionally in general chemistry. But it really struck me that by giving these specific names and by giving them icons and putting the icons in the problem sets and on the slides where we're intentionally cultivating these skills, that it brought a transparency to it. I would hope anyone who came through my class and engaged in recitation or PLTL would say, yeah, I learned to work collaboratively with other people. But to bring that to students' attention, to say, this is what we are doing, and this is a marketable skill. Like, this is something that you can list on a resume. And that if you can work harmoniously with a group of people and value different perspectives and be open to changing the way that you think, you are invaluable to any institution. It doesn't matter where you go in life. It will make you a better fill in the blank. It will make you a better son or daughter. It'll make you a better friend. It will make, having awareness of who you are in these spaces with other people trying to come together and attain a goal is incredibly important. And so it's been really interesting to kind of look at that through a new lens of what are these skills that we are developing and what are the mile markers that we can give students. If you are learning to work in a collaborative space, what are some things that you might be doing a month into that class?
Mm-hmm.
What are some things that you might be doing 2 months in? What are some things that you should be doing at the end of that class? And really think about that from a developmental standpoint
Mm-hmm.
was a really cool new exploration for us. In that, again, I hope we were doing that the whole time, but to bring transparency and language and to help guide students to realize that that was what's going on. That I hope you all go on and think about wave functions after my class. Probably not, but I certainly hope you all go on to work together to solve complex problems in whatever field you go into.
I love that. And I think that's just like the underlying aspect of whatever STEM is, really. Because like even when like in elementary school, when they taught you what STEM is, it's you're growing up to the leap. Like you're going from like one collaborative environment to the next.
Yes.
And that's how, whether you're a researcher or you're a scientist, and that's how you're solving modern day problems.
Yes.
And that's what's really important. But I think even then, like sometimes you face like obstacles, like when it comes to like STEM and when it comes to leadership, just because I feel like those are two fields that people seem like don't go hand in hand, which is like an unfortunate thing that people do think.
Yes.
But when you think of STEM, when you think of research, for example, you're like, oh, you're in a lab, you're probably, you have to collaborate with people, but you're not in like a leadership position. But I know like students have thought like, I'm great at networking, maybe I should go be a business student. But how can we apply like those skills like networking into leadership, and what challenges, how can we overcome those obstacles that come with that?
That's a really, really great and multifaceted question. For me, I think the fundamentals that I think don't get talked about enough in STEM fields are the the gratitude that we should cultivate. You know, if you have a mind that can navigate these complex systems and see these relationships, that you should cultivate gratitude. I don't think everyone's able to do that, but also appreciate the responsibility that comes with that. And we don't just have a responsibility for our own personal growth or gain through that. We have a responsibility to our community to make this accessible for them, to communicate this accessibility, and to come together and teach the next generation this. And I think that's a huge part of where those skills have been undervalued and underutilized in how we communicate with the public. And I think we saw that through the pandemic. It really was heartbreaking to see how many people distrusted the vaccine, that this couldn't come, that, you know, something could not, in science, couldn't come this fast. And it's like, no, if you tear down all of these pay structures and we actually openly communicate with one another and work together towards outcomes, we can achieve great things in a very short period of time. And that was really eye-opening for me, in that this goes beyond what happens in our lab. And we need people who have those skills and those networking skills and appreciate how much leadership and service are really intertwined. And I think if you come at that with that sense of gratitude and responsibility and the appreciation for that service, that is where we do our best work.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. Just because when you like think about all of the different like obstacles that have come in like the national level, just like as you mentioned through the pandemic, but even on like a personal level, what are like the obstacles you've like faced just being either like a professor or like a leader, and how have you been able to overcome those?
Yeah, it's a really great question. I think I was in many ways pleasantly surprised coming up as a woman in science. In my generation, I think we had made great strides. I think one of the biggest mistakes that was made in trying to promote diversity and inclusion was a lot of the people in power said, I'm going to treat everyone the same, which really meant let's just treat everybody like we're white men in this business, right? Which I think came from a good place because that's who they were, right? But that's not who we are, and we have to meet everyone as individuals. So I think we're doing the right things in the wrong ways, but I was pleasantly surprised that no one said, "Oh, you can't do this because of your gender," or "I don't think that you can be successful because of this." I think some of the bigger challenges I faced through that, because of this, we're going to treat everybody the same, or I'm going to assume the jobs that you like. There are a lot of microaggressions, like,
Right.
so you'll make the coffee for the meeting. There's a lot of that. But overall, I think I was fortunate to meet with a lot of support along my career. I think some of the biggest challenges I faced, it was interesting because painting with very broad strokes, and speaking from my own personal experience, people either understood that the amount of power or influence or popularity or what is not limited. Like, because you are succeeding doesn't mean that I'm failing or you're taking a part of the pie,
Yeah.
And it was those people I came across in my career that I felt we're not in competition. Like, if we are a part of the same team, if we're a part of the same department, if we're a part of the same group, when you shine, I shine, and vice versa. And so that navigating those relationships where there felt like there was competition there, which was so counterproductive to what we were trying to do, was a really big challenge. Um, and and for me, and I think the advice I would give to anyone coming up is, if you are coming from this from a service perspective, if you're meeting people with kindness and compassion, and you're doing this because this best exemplifies my talents and my passions, and this is where I get to be my best self, um, and you're not coming at this from ego or I want the next award or I want the next thing. It's if you come at it from that standpoint, it's really easy to stand up for what you think should be done, or to push for the change that you want to see.
Yeah, and I completely agree with everything that you just said, because just from a student perspective, that aspect of competition is something that's very significant, but it's not something that's like exemplified every day. Like, it's not like a common peer pressure situation.
Yeah.
It's more like
Yeah.
in the back. It's like
Yes.
lingering. It follows you around from
Yes.
class to class,
Yes.
which is unfortunate, but unfortunately that's just the way that the process, like, since I'm pre-med, I can really only attest to that. But it's just the way that when you go through, you know that you're going to go through the next 4 years with these people, and then you're going to compete again to get into another school, compete again to get into a residency. So I think that's that aspect of competition where people aren't able to realize that even in like the STEM departments, what we're doing is building everyone up together. Like, it's not just like in the STEM departments, oh, we have like 4 different disciplines and we're all just going to work individually, but it's how can we intertwine the science with the technology, and how can we connect everyone to build them together.
Yes.
And I think that's why, for me personally, like a lot of like what I wrote my applications on was about how I intertwine science and service. And I was just wondering what your thoughts are on intertwining like two fields like that, because I know like the medical field, for example, we say is kind of like science and service, which we know like there's always like different issues and obstacles that we come through with every like field. But in like the chemistry department, for example, where you work, how are you able to intertwine things like science and service?
Yeah, I think I think science is service. I mean, if we think about who who we are as human beings, from a young, it's just an innate pursuit of knowledge, or an innate pursuit of understanding. And so to be able to do that as your profession, to be able to do that as your career, um, it is a privilege to be able to do that, and it is a service to everyone to be able to push our boundaries of what we know about whatever systems that you're interested in. And so and one, I would say, one of the things that I think I've been most appreciative to be in this time and space in working, one of the things I felt in an intimidating way in the very beginning of my career was being I was a lot younger than a lot of my colleagues who I was teaching alongside of. And so I felt, whether this was me internalizing it or whether it was real, that my ideas got dismissed
Mm-hmm.
a lot more readily than it would have been if had I been.
Mm-hmm.
And I have felt that now that I'm a little bit older, that, and I don't know if I'm just more polished or I don't know, but I do feel, or maybe I'm more confident, but I felt that very early. And one thing I've learned through this is being able to work in spaces like the recitation program and the
Mm-hmm.
PLTO program, how much students have taught me
Mm-hmm.
when it comes to how we think about gender identities, how we
Right.
build inclusive spaces. You know,
Mm-hmm.
you all have really pushed us in all of the best ways when it comes to um, rethinking how we think about students' mindset coming in, and have those kind of conversations. And so, you know, I think about science. It's got to be a community. We've got to be learning from each other at
Right.
all of these aspects, and service in that. All of these voices are harnessed in a way that pushes our knowledge and understanding, and then that gets turned back to benefiting the public at large, I think.
Mm-hmm. I love that, because just hearing about your journey as like an individual, from someone who in college was taking those same chemistry courses to teaching them now, I think there's just so many things in between about like the way you've grown as an individual and the way that you've been able to, one, exemplify leadership, and two, learn from the leaders like in your community.
Yes.
And I think one big thing about learning when we talk about leaders is just not only figuring out how to be a good leader, but also how not to be a bad leader, if that makes sense.
Yes.
So I think it's really nice that you've been able to experience both aspects. But if you could go back on your journey, is there something that you would change or do differently?
It's a really tough question, because I think probably the most wise answer to this is everything along the journey has gotten me here. So, but I will say one thing I wish I would have done um, as a younger person, and one thing that I really emphasize to students in my class, is I wish I would have celebrated my victories more. I feel like when you are this driven and you have such high expectations for yourself, we're all like, okay, 100% is like what I should be doing, right? Like, I won't really give myself a pat on the back until I'm like at 110, you know, like I've really gone above and beyond. And looking back, you know, when you're going through a class and, you know, you're trying to achieve, let's say, this grade, and you're working towards that, and your grades are getting better, you know, I would just see that I'm not up to where I want to be, right? Like, instead of going, wow, I've done this much better than the last time, or I can really feel myself working through these problems with more confidence, or I'm not, you know, panicking. Like, I'm in the moment, and I'm thinking through these, and I'm putting things together in a way that I didn't necessarily do this on a previous assessment. I wish I would have done that for myself a lot more. I feel like sometimes it's such an odd thing that we can be so kind and compassionate and such good friends, but then, like, our inner monologues are, we can tear each other ourselves down like no other. And I wish I could go back and change the way I talk to myself.
Yeah. It's kind of just like Inside Out, like all the different emotions coming together, trying to figure out the balance. And just like a rapid fire question, but what is one quality of leaders, particular in the STEM field, you think is like something really important?
To lead with kindness, compassion, and understanding. I think believe people to start off with. You know, when there's so many times I initially, when I first started, you know, and get emails that, you know, this thing happened to me and I have to move my quiz, you know, and it was like, well, you know, some of the people are like, well, that's why we have a drop quiz policy. And I'm like, well, we have a drop quiz policy if they have a cold, and we don't really have a drop quiz policy if they've experienced this tragedy in there. Like, we like, and if they're making that story up to get out of a quiz, life will work out the way it needs to work out. We need to lead with kindness and compassion. So believing people and empowering people, and being patient with everybody with where we are. We're all growing and learning. And if you're, especially if you're in the teaching realm, we didn't have it together at 17 or 18. You know, we can't put 43-year-old expectations on 17-year-olds. And so to constantly evaluate that, I think, is every communication of mine kind and compassionate. And sometimes it is hard to be patient. There's a lot of logistics with a big class. And when it's your 46th email of the day, you know, you have to go back to that. But that would definitely be it for me.
I absolutely love that. And I think that just gives anyone watching this and just students a new perspective on what like the faculty go through, like when they go through the chem department. Because on our end, all we see is our 8 quizzes, 9 quizzes, but we don't see that there's like 1,500 quizzes that you actually have to go through and grade and facilitate. And I think that's just something that's really like nice, because I know we've all gone through, even in the past 2 semesters, I've had professors where they haven't like treated me with kindness or like an understanding. And the way that I've like been able to experience chemistry, which like a course where the content is very difficult, I know that me, as well as like a lot of different people, we've talked about how we've been able to get through the course because of the understanding that's come behind it. And I think that's something in STEM fields especially that isn't exemplified, because since it's not like a humanities course where we're not doing like active group discussions every day, and we're not like interacting with the professor like that, it feels like we don't have like a sense of understanding or that connection. But like ever since like the first day when we had to like raise our right hand to the wand and like everything we had to do in class, we're able to build that connection and like that then feel that you do have like that empathy towards us. And I think that's something that's very important. And so what advice would you kind of end with for your like future, like if you have like all the people that you're sitting with in that class, you know, you have future doctors, future scientists, future astronauts, future writers, everybody, if you want to be a leader in that field, a leader in healthcare, a leader in literally space, like anything, what is your advice to them?
Oh, that's such a good question. I'm probably a broken record at this point, but I think I think it's a wonderful goal to have, but if you're going into these fields with your sole goal to be a leader from a reason that stems from I want the accolades, or I want the trophy, or I want that, you're not going to be an effective leader. But if you're going in there with confidence and knowing what you bring to the table, I know I'm up for this. I know that I have the ability. I know I have the passion. I know I have the drive, and I want to share this, and I want to advance my field for the benefit of others, or I want to help the next generation come up. If you're doing this from the perspective of I am in a position of power and privilege. I have not only these natural abilities, but I've been given all of these opportunities to be educated at this level. Again, it's that responsibility to bring that back and share. And so to do that in a selfless manner are the people that we want leading us in any aspect of life, I think. And it's a very tough balance to strike. It's really interesting as a mom to 2 young kids. We're born with the drive to learn, and we are born being proud of ourselves. Like, it's been so fun to watch my kids. Just an example, my daughter started playing volleyball. She's in middle school, 6th grade. And there was a girl on her team who could just really struggled to serve the ball over the net, like short every single time. And in a game, she hit it twice over the net. I mean, like barely over the net, like just barely got it over. And the second time she hit it over, she spun around and she looked right at her dad and she goes, "Did you see that, Dad?" And I was like, "Yeah." And she goes, "I'm on fire." And I was like, when do we lose that? Like we all come in with that. So to carry that for, I don't know when life stomps that out of us, when we're just like, I'm not good enough, and am I gonna make it? You know, I just wish that inner I'm on fire could come out. but so to have that part of it, but also have the mature lens of not being ego driven,
Right.
and not being, you're doing it for your team and not necessarily for you. I think if that can come together, you're invaluable to any institution. Yeah.
That's amazing. And on that note, I just hope I can be a leader like that one day, just as I go through my journey in the STEM fields, kind of wrapping all the intersections together. It's been an absolute honor to have you today and just spotlight you, because I've learned so much about leadership in STEM fields and how the basis of leadership in a STEM field is collaboration, empathy, and kindness. And I think that's something that we all have to take away, and how it's really important to be leaders in STEM fields, but also understand what's happening around us. So thank you so much once again.
Thank
It's
you.
so great to just talk to you today.
This has been so enjoyable. Thank you so much.
Thank you. And we hope you have a great day and tune in to our next Faculty Leadership Spotlight.